The United States government spends $892 billion per year to defend its citizens and its territory. It is the best protected country in the world, as President Bush has said. Nevertheless, on the 11th of September, the heart of America was attacked from the sky, and 3,000 helpless American citizens were killed in their own cities.
Was it a dream? Or was it real? It was election night 2000, and everything seemed to be going as planned.
In New York, Al Gore is our projected winner. The Garden State is green for Gore.
We project that Mr. Gore is the winner in Delaware. This state has voted with the winner in
Excuse me 1 second. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Mike, you know I wouldn't do this if it weren't big. Florida goes for Al Gore.
CNN announces that recalled Florida in the Al Gore column.
Then something called the Fox News Channel called the election in favor of the other guy.
Not to interrupt you, Fox News now projects George W. Bush the winner in Florida, and thus it appears the winner of the presidency of the United States.
All of a sudden, the other network said, hey, if Fox said it, it must be true.
All of us at the networks made a mistake and projected Florida in the Al Gore column. It was our mistake.
Now, what most people don't know is that the man who was in charge of the decision desk at Fox that night, the man who called it for Bush, was none other than Bush's first cousin, John Ellis. How does someone like Bush get away with something like this? Well, first, it helps if your brother is the governor of the state in question.
You know something? We are going to win Florida. Mark my words. You can write it down.
Second, make sure the chairman of your campaign is also the vote-counting woman, and that her state has hired a company that's going to knock voters off the rolls who aren't likely to vote for you. You can usually tell them by the color of their skin.
I'm not a scientist and I don't know much about formulas, but someone is trying to create a formula.
I present my voter's registration to the lady with my driver's license. She said my name wasn't on the paper.
What do you mean I can't vote?
I received a letter saying that I was a convicted felon at my office.
I don't believe the American people, even to this day, really understand what happened in Florida 2000.
5 months before the 2000 election, Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, and Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State, ordered the removal of 57,000 voters from the voter rolls.
Highfalutin folks in Florida and Texas got together and decided that they were going to devise a way to make a list that would deny black people in Florida the right to vote.
Usually politicians follow under massive firepower cover. She's out in front taking the first arrows.
There are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing.
I be afraid for her sometimes, you know what I'm saying? Like she walking around with scopes on her forehead, with infrared green, infrared beams all on her dome.
I pulled numbers for her district, trying to see if there was any way we could beat her.
They concocted the scheme to have their candidate run in the Democratic Party, knowing that it would get all the Republicans to cross over. This is another way to deny black people the vote. You figure out a way to trump their vote, and that's what they figured.
Truth of the matter is that the media, large corporations, the people who control politically our country today, do not want you to participate.
She the only reason why I even got into the whole electoral process.
Their nightmare is that young people, lower income people, working people jump into the political process. They do not want that.
You want my son to die for you. You want my daughters to wave the flag. You have to give us the reason why. My vote and everyone else in this room and across this country must be counted.
The lines in the black precincts were 2, 3, 4 times as long as those in the suburbs. Now some say, well, gee, that's just an accident. When you see that kind of an event, you better believe someone intended that.
I'm just photographing for election protection.
We're waiting in line to vote.
Okay, now we're walking down a path into the woods.
There's something wrong with our democracy. More and more of our citizens are growing uneasy.
This is not merely about bitterness or a recount. This is about a blackout. It's time to end the blackout and shine the lights on our precious right to vote.
Mr. Curtis, would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Clinton Eugene Curtis.
And where do you reside?
Tallahassee, Florida.
And what is your profession?
I'm a computer programmer.
Would you please speak into the microphone so the audience can hear your testimony?
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials that might be on county boards of elections could detect?
They'd never see it.
Mr. Would you answer that question once again?
They would never see it.
So how would such a program, a secret program that fixes the election, how could it be detected?
You would have to view it either in the source code, or you'd have to have a receipt and then count the hard paper against the actual vote total. Other than that, you won't see it.
All right, Mr. Curtis, if you had been asked, you or others with your professional expertise had been asked to design a protective program that would protect the Ohio elections from against such software to fix the election, could you have done so?
If we've been asked to make a program that can fix the election, sure, anybody can do it.
No, could you have designed a program or a procedure or a protocol that would have protected Ohio against this kind of rigging?
No, you have to look at the source code. You have to get probably programmers from both or all parties to look at the source code and determine if there's anything in there that shouldn't be there. I mean, it's a simple program. You're adding 1 to a person's total. It's 100 lines of code tops.
All right. Are you aware of whether there was any protective action in Ohio against this kind of vote rigging through software?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
You were not asked to assist in the development of any protective system, is that correct?
No, I was not.
In Europe, have you reviewed at all the election results in Ohio?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Given the availability of such vote rigging software and the testimony that has been given under oath of substantial statistical anomalies and gross differences between exit polling data and the actual tabulated results, do you have an opinion whether or not the Ohio election, presidential election, was hacked?
Yes, I would say it was. I mean, if you have exit polling data that is significantly off from the vote, then it's probably hacked.
And your testimony is under oath?
Yes, sir.
And the testimony you've given is true?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Waters and I have the same question.
Come back to the podium.
Who did you say you were asked to prepare?
I was asked by Tom Feeney. He's now a congressman. At that time, he was Speaker of the House of Florida, Yang Enterprises, which was the company I work for, lobbyist, and their corporate attorney. He wore a lot of hats.
And at the time, he was the Speaker of the House of Florida. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Congressman.
You say he was the lobbyist for the voting machine company at the same time he was Speaker of the House?
I don't know what the voting machine company is. He was a lobbyist for Yang Enterprises. We had NASA contracts and
Yang Enterprises did what? Computers?
Computers.
Okay, and he was your lobbyist. Your company's
He was a lobbyist for that company, yes.
And he asked you to design a code to rig an election.
Yes.
While he was Speaker of the Florida House.
Yes.
This was during or previous to the 2000 election?
Yes, October into September.
And did he ever express why he wanted a code to rig an election?
No, I immediately assumed that they were trying to keep you guys from cheating them. So, so I wrote up the documentation on what you would look for in the source code, how you would make sure that you didn't get, taken advantage of, make sure that all voting machines had receipts, because that way you could back count the ones that looked a little funny. And I handed it.
By receipts, you mean a paper trail?
Yes, paper trail. And I handed that in to Mrs. Yang and said, here's your report, here's your program. And she said, you don't understand, we need to hide the fraud in the source code.
Hide the fraud, not reveal the fraud.
Not reveal the fraud, because it's needed to control the vote in South Florida, was what she said.
That's what she said. To your knowledge, was this used?
I have no idea. I was ready to leave, so I retired and left the company.
Your testimony a moment ago, I think you said just before you left, in answer to Congresswoman Tubbs Jones' question, would you just repeat what you said in terms of the exit polls?
Oh, the exit polls should not be significantly different than the vote.
And if they were, you would conclude what?
I would conclude someone's playing with the vote.
Not with the exit polls?
That's possible too.
Okay,
something is definitely skewed.
Something is skewed in one or the other above.
Right. To select which one, you'd have to see where the problem is.
Let me ask you one further question. Assuming for the moment that such software, that's what you call it, such software to rig a vote was used in one or more machines in Ohio or in Florida, could you today detect that if you looked at the source code?
If you could get the machines and they have not been patched yet, I mean, once they get in and touch them, anything can happen. You can also set timers to that, but then you see the timers. Then you'd have to take those machines, decompile them, which I couldn't do, but possibly a Microsoft and MIT something could do. You might be able to see it.
You might.
Not necessarily. Depends on how good they are at destroying what they had.
Destroying what they had by tampering the machine afterwards, or by programming a destroy instruction in the first place?
Right, because since you didn't...
Either or both?
Either or both. You didn't actually see what's in there, so you don't know if the code is running in a single executable or running in various modules. If it's running in modules, you can make the code actually eat itself.
Let me ask you one further question. I've been told that people who assume that lots of the election results, or that a large fraction of the election result in any state may have been affected by deliberate fraud in the computer, are paranoid, because in order to do that, you have to have access to thousands of machines, and that would be readily detectable. To what extent is that true?
It depends on the technology you use. If you did a central tabulation machine that fed in, all you'd have to do is set a flag. You set a flag, the central tabulation machine would then flip your vote.
So one person putting in bad code in a central tabulation machine could affect thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of votes.
Right, and you could activate either automatically, or you could make it so that there's code existing on like an electronic machine that feeds it, where you would punch it in, it would set the flag, the server would see the flag, and then...
And if you had a recount, and there were no paper trail, would that be, assuming that had happened, would that be revealable by seeing a discrepancy between what the central tabulator showed and what the individual machines, which had not been tampered with, showed?
Not if I wrote it.
Why not? In other words,
I would make it match.
You could work back from the tabulator to the individual machines, so that the tabulator would tell the machines to switch their results?
Yes, it talks both ways. You can flip it to whatever you need.
And they actually do talk to each other, the machines.
As long as it's hooked up, as long as it's networked together, they can talk to each other.
So in other words, there's absolutely no assurance whatsoever on anything with regard to these machines?
Absolutely none, unless you look at the source code and make sure it's safe before it goes in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Mathers. I know that Congresswoman Waters has a question, and then Senator Miller, and then Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs-Jones.
This will only take a moment if you would come back to the...
I'm new at this.
As you know, there has been a lot of discussion about, I think it was Diebold Company, their relationship to the president and the administration, and supposedly comments about helping to ensure that the president was reelected. In your world, in your environment, have you heard any of this kind of discussion? Do you know people for Diebold? Do you have any sense of any actions that may have been taken?
I don't know anything about that at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Senator Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I suspect people will attack you in terms of your credibility. Could you restate once again your credentials?
I'm a programmer. I worked for NASA, worked for ExxonMobil, worked for Department of Transportation, and other elements of my story, because this company, well, let's get into it. Why not? This company also, they have NASA contracts, and they were basically downloading tons of information, I mean gigabytes worth, and handing them off to this little Chinese guy named Henry Nee, and it didn't seem right, and he was hacking things, and I wrote a program for DOT that allowed contractors to send their information into DOT, and he was kind of the quality assurance guy for software. He put a wiretapping module in the program that went out to the contractors so that it actually sent everything they sent back to Yang. So I reported all this, and just last March, I think, he was arrested for attempting to send anti-tank missile chips to the capital of Communist China. So, if that's correct, this is such a small thing. Of course, I think he only got a $100 fine. And no time.
Thank you. Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs-Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are now going to back to the public testimony. And
but there was one episode early on that raised questions about whether he was actually walking the walk. This was the Enron oil scandal, also known as the Valhalla scandal.
While you were at Arthur Andersen, were you involved in an investigation at a company called Enron Oil?
Yes, I was.
The issue with the company in 1987 involved the misappropriation of monies by two traders.
In 1987, two oil traders made bets for Enron on whether the price of oil would rise or fall. Oil trading is like gambling. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But Enron Oil always seemed to win, much to Ken Lay's delight.
I tried to explain to Ken Lay the tremendous risk that you have in that market. You can lose 10 times your original investment.
A veteran trader, Mike Muckleroy, was suspicious of Enron Oil's steady, high profits.
Well, this oil trading business had profits that nobody could really understand, and in fact that many of Ken Lay's lieutenants questioned. They said this business can't be making this much money legitimately. Something weird is going on.
Something weird was going on. The first hint came from an anonymous tip about the president of the company, Louis Bourget.
Bourget had taken some $3+ million of corporate funds and put it in a personal account of his.
There were offshore accounts, phony books, and a trail that led from the company's treasurer, Tom Mastroeni, to a mysterious Lebanese speculator no one could find, M. Yass.
Remember the Enron tapes? Enron workers were heard manipulating the California energy shortage a few years back and gloating over it. Federal energy regulators now say Enron made more than $1.5 billion off that shortage. And today, more audio and documents surfaced. The first to indicate the scamming and scheming started years earlier than we previously knew. CBS's Vince Gonzalez gives you the inside story.
During the West Coast power crisis, homes went dark and streetlights were out in California, causing injuries and accidents. But the danger didn't stop Enron's energy traders from having a good laugh.
They had to do a rolling blackout through the town, and there was a red light there, he didn't see. That's beautiful. I'm like, this is causing animosity throughout the state now. Cars are blowing up.
Newly released evidence shows years before the crisis, Enron schemed to manipulate markets. The new tapes, routinely recorded by Enron to protect their own deals and later obtained by this small utility in Washington state, confirm what CBS News has been reporting for 4 years, that Enron secretly shut down power plants so they could cause and then cash in on the crisis.
We want you guys to get a little creative,
okay,
and come up with a reason to go down.
Plant operators were coached on how to lie to officials.
Just call them, hey guys, finish our queue after coming down.
Okay, so we're just coming down for some maintenance, like a forced outage type thing.
Right.
And that's cool.
Hopefully.
Enron also pulled power out of states like California, causing emergency conditions to worsen.
Sorry, California, I'm bringing all my power out of the state. I think I moved out over 600 megawatts.
The shutdowns and pullouts triggered sky-high power prices.
We're just making money hand over fist.
And when states complained,
get a f***ing clue.
Yeah, leave us alone, let us make a little bit of money.
Yeah, exactly.
When the schemes began to unravel, employees blamed the men running Enron.
I told you they were all crooks. I just didn't know how much.
As far as I'm concerned, nothing happened in Enron that Ken Lay didn't blast.
But former CEO Ken Lay, in this Enron training tape obtained by CBS News, had a different message.
Enron is a company that deals with everyone with absolute integrity.
A federal grand jury didn't buy it. Lay has been indicted, and the tapes could be used against him. A company spokesperson would only say Enron continues to cooperate with all ongoing investigations. Vince Gonzalez, CBS News, Los Angeles.
This trading floor was manned by America's best and brightest, charting the futures of energy and power. And high above each with a private staircase, Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling had built their own plush staterooms. They were known as the smartest guys in the room, captains of a ship too powerful to ever go down.
In the Titanic, the captain went down with the ship. In Enron, it looks to me like the captain first gave himself and some friends a bonus, then lowered himself and the top folks down in the lifeboat, and then hollered up and said, by the way, everything's going to be just fine.
Pentagon. The day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. To understand how the Pentagon can lose track of trillions, consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
Jim Minery, a former Marine turned whistleblower, is risking his job by speaking out for the first time about the millions he noticed were missing from one defense agency's balance sheets. Minery tried to follow the money trail, even crisscrossing the country looking for records.
The director looked at me and he says, "Why do you care about this stuff?" It took me aback, you know. My supervisor asked me why I care about doing a good job. So
he was reassigned and says officials then covered up the problem by just writing it off.
They got to cover it up. That's where the corruption comes in. They've got to cover up the fact that they can't do the job.
The Pentagon's Inspector General partially substantiated several of Minery's allegations, but could not prove officials tried to manipulate the financial statements. 20 years ago, Pentagon employee Franklin C. Spinney made headlines exposing what he calls the accounting games. He's still there, and although he does not speak for the Pentagon, he believes the problem has gotten worse.
Those numbers are pie in the sky. The books are cooked routinely year after year after year.
Retired Vice Admiral Jack Shanahan commanded the Navy's Second Fleet the first time Donald Rumsfeld served as Defense Secretary.
With good financial oversight, we could find $48 billion in loose change in that building without having to hit the taxpayers.
In the 2.5 minutes since this report began, the Pentagon has spent nearly $2 million, and it may never know where 25% of those tax dollars went. In Los Angeles, I'm Vince Gonzalez for Eye on America.
Protocol in, and the reason that the hijacking protocol is slow is because you had to get Pentagon approval before you could release your fighters. Those two type of protocols lasted until June 1st, 2001, 3 months before 9/11. In June of 2001, Rumsfeld and the Pentagon and the military changed the procedures, and instead of having two protocols, one fast, one slow, they went to one protocol, slow. If we had reacted to the in-flight emergency immediately, the fighters would have been up and on the way, and those aircraft would never, ever have reached their targets. But when the center controllers came to notifying the military, okay, because they had only one protocol to work with, that protocol went through the Pentagon. Guess what? Guess who didn't answer the phone? Sorry, it was the Pentagon. Here's an analogy that I can give that would help out the common person here. What Rumsfeld did is the fire call comes into the fire station, but before the fire truck gets a chance to leave, it has to call the mayor of the city to get approval for that departure. And what if the mayor's out for breakfast or he's sleeping late and he doesn't answer the phone?
I wanted to focus just a moment on the Presidential Emergency Operating Center. You were there for a good part of the day. I think you were there with the Vice President. And we had that order given, I think it was by the President, that authorized the shooting down of commercial aircraft that were suspected to be controlled by terrorists. Were you there when that order was given?
No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Pentagon, yeah.
And so I was not aware that that discussion had already taken place. And but in listening to the conversation between the young man and the Vice President, then at the time I didn't really recognize the significance of that. And then later I heard of the fact that the airplanes had been scrambled from Langley to come up to DC, but those planes were still about 10 minutes away. And so then at the time we heard about the airplane that went into Pennsylvania, then I thought, oh my God, did we shoot it down? And then we had to, with the Vice President, go through the Pentagon to check that out.
Let me see if I understand. The plane that was headed toward the Pentagon and was some miles away, there was an order to shoot that plane down.
Well, I don't know that specifically. But I do know that the airplanes were scrambled from Langley or from Norfolk, the Norfolk area, and but I did not know about the order specifically, other than listening to that other conversation.
But there very clearly was an order to shoot commercial aircraft.
Subsequently, I found that out.
With respect to Flight 93, what type of information were you and the Vice President receiving about that flight?
The only information we had at that point was when it went into when it crashed.
I see. You didn't know beforehand about that airplane?
Did not.
And so there was no specific order there to shoot that plane down?
No, sir.
But there were military planes in the air in position to shoot down commercial aircraft.
That's right. The planes had been scrambled, I believe, from Otis at that point.
Columbia, Maryland. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, C-SPAN. Sir, I would like to ask you this question regarding the testimony of Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, who appeared before you guys on May 23rd, 2003. And Norman Mineta was at the Emergency Operations Center in the White House with Vice President Dick Cheney around 9:20 on September 11, 2001. And during that time, Norman Mineta said to you guys that while he was there, during the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Now, this had to be the Pentagon, the flight that hit the Pentagon. How can Dick Cheney know this and Donald Rumsfeld not know it, the President not know it, the military not know it? And another question, sir.
I'm going to let you go. First, I want to ask you, how often do you get these kind of questions? Because there seems to be a whole world out there that revolves around every jot and tittle of everything that's ever been said. It's just suspecting that this is a conspiracy.
Well, that's right. Look, we're still arguing about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And we're arguing about John F. Kennedy's assassination. September 11th is one of the most traumatic days in the history of our country, maybe the most traumatic. We on the 9/11 Commission took our best crack at it. We were ordered by the statute to tell the story of 9/11, put aside the recommendations. We did the very best we could on that, but it's a dynamic situation. Information continually comes up, and there's a lot of suspicion about what we found and what we didn't find. So these stories will continue. Now, with regard to Cheney's action, he was the person in the White House. The president at the time was in Sarasota, Florida, and speaking to that small group, really, of children. And communications were not as good as we would like them to have been between President Bush and the White House at that time. And incidentally, that's one of the things we think have been corrected since that time. But the Vice President was in the operation room. He was in charge, in a sense. He was in communication with the President as quickly as he could be at that point in time. And yet, we did find a flaw in the communication problem. Don Rumsfeld was in the Pentagon, as I recall, but not, fortunately, at the point of impact. And when the impact did occur, he wanted to try to be helpful. And he personally went over there to try to be helpful before they got him and I think turned him around. Cheney was in the key position at the time.
During the Amalgam Virgo war game of June 1 and 2 of 2001, the routine called for all of U.S. airspace to come completely under the command of the former attacking Red Team, that is to say, Canadian intelligence and their Air Force, here shown as a CF-18. For 24 hours, the Canadian attackers would suddenly switch sides, and the U.S. Air Force would completely stand down and surrender protection of the U.S. to NATO and the Canadian air teams and their anti-hijacking formula. This scenario was replayed again with even greater complication and confusion during the multiple war games in play on the morning of 9/11, again with Canadian forces and NATO alone in controlling skies over America during the Global Guardian war games of September 11th. It is known that on the morning of 9/11, as many as 20 independent war game scenarios were being played out, with the U.S. Air Force grounded during the Canadian Blue Air time. It was during this time that the Twin Towers were struck, the Pentagon was struck, and there was an attempt to fly a plane into the Capitol, aborted over the skies of Pennsylvania as Flight 93 was vaporized into nothingness that morning. The military and ultimately public perception has been prepared, conditioned, and neatly put into a virtual mind box in which their attention and ability to effectively respond to any real threat was limited and restricted. Boeing Aircraft has developed an uninterruptible autopilot, the tamper-proof autopilot system that allows the crew members or a agency such as the FAA or military to electronically control the airliner through the QRS-11 gyro chip, and the signals to the airliner are sent via satellite to the aircraft itself, which then will be landed safely at any destination selected by the controlling agency. June 1st and 2nd, 2001, Amalgam Virgo, U.S. military war game with Canadian intelligence. This is the dry run in the summer before 9/11 to show off and test the anti-hijack system being sold to the United States. Amalgam Virgo 01 was an air defense exercise created intellectually in Canada and foisted upon the U.S. Air Force and Department of Defense. It presumed that Osama bin Laden may use drones and cruise missiles to attack high-value targets in the United States of America, and it suggested that F-15s and F-16s from the U.S. Air Force would be the counters to those types of attacks. Slide 2 shows NORAD, which is North American Air Defense Fighters, and their exercise charter. Most of it's pretty standard, but what caught my attention on this page is that perceived is in big letters and a different color than the rest of it. And I think it's the intention of the three-card Monte operators behind Amalgam Virgo to put in our minds that the threats are Osama bin Laden, cruise missiles, and drones. The Canadian intelligence folks that put together this confusing exercise, Amalgam Virgo, intentionally inserted a gray area here. The gray area that was intentionally created in the planning for Amalgam Virgo would be used with great effect on the later Global Guardian of 9/11. It always introduced questions as to who is responsible for what and who is in charge of putting the response into motion. Designers, the perpetrators of 9/11, intentionally made it very easy for people to be confused, and this slide in front of you shows the confusion. There's multiple poor choices made, and no one is going to be responsible because the responsibility will be distributed across a lot of bad choices, and there will be nobody in charge.
And in this reconstruction, a 767 to scale should have looked like this as it flew across the lawn and into the building. But that is not what the security camera imaged. In fact, an object does skid across the lawn, but nothing the size of a 767, but a weapon nonetheless. After the impact, only one hole was visible on the wall.
here with Michael Kelly, who was a witness to this attack at the Pentagon. I'm going to let him describe what he saw here, I guess about 20 minutes ago with me, Michael Kelly. First of all, let me just first describe the scene. This is the west side of the Pentagon, the heliport side off of Washington Boulevard. Were you driving or what?
Yes, I was in the traffic on the 14th Street Bridge, right at the Pentagon, tied up going into town, and I heard this plane come over my head. It was really low.
What size plane?
It sounded like a small plane, but it was very, very low. And the next thing I know, there was this tremendous explosion as it hit the Pentagon. I looked over, and the smoke started coming up. Pieces of the plane and pieces of the Pentagon were falling onto the 14th Street, onto the Shirley Highway. Very scary. So I decided not to go across.
It might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual site of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon and then caused the side to collapse. Now, even though if you look at the pictures of the Pentagon, you see that the floors have all collapsed, that didn't happen immediately. It wasn't until almost about 45 minutes later that the structure was weakened enough that all of the floors collapsed.
Foreground of those videos, again, very small pieces. I mean, I'm standing on pieces, a dinner plate or smaller in size. The largest piece I believe I saw was maybe 2 by 3 feet, and it was crumpled. I believe that is the piece that everybody sees with a blue stripe. Well, or it had red paint on it, red logo, red stripe. Again, I didn't dwell on that. There was a lot going on.
And later, teams of what appeared to be CIA combing the lawn and moving evidence around, and then removing evidence altogether. The hit team that was to record the impact of the fourth plane was likely packed up due to failure to reach its target. But it did start like the others, with a red team hijacking that was transformed into a real threat after it met its weaponized drone near Cleveland Airport, the location of the Lewis Research Center, a NASA facility, and both of these planes likely crashed in Shanksville. The passenger jet exploded in the air, and the drone impacted the ground. The only known image of the impact is from the 9/11 report and shows an explosion instead of burning jet fuel. The first crash site had a small hole and some burnt trees, but no evidence of a 200,000-pound airplane. When Tom Ridge flew over early in the day, the damage of the UAV impact was slight, with no large fires in the woods. There was a smoldering hole. And as news crews started covering the crash site, the hole was shown on the national news services. Then the NTSB crew started photographing all the small bits strewn all over the crash sites, and there were 3. There were no large parts, only small, shattered bits. And it was then seen from the air that debris was scattered several miles to the northwest. An engine was unearthed 7 miles from the impact hole. The news crews made it clear that there was nothing left of the aircraft. But even then they were not aware that the debris field was spread out over 7 miles, not a single point of impact.
Chris Kanicki, he's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate, the Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire. Just a couple of people walking around. They look like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long, and probably about 10 feet long, or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
But then a red headband was recovered from the crash undamaged. And the lucky random terrorist attack theory was presented once again. But this picture shows all that was left of a 200,000-pound airplane. Not enough to even fill a dumpster. During the morning into the afternoon, the Naudet brothers moved their film crew over to World Trade Center 7. The Naudet brothers were once again in a place to record the collapse. In this building were very high-profile agencies and organizations, in particular the SEC, investigating thousands of files of corporate violations and corruption, the CIA, the Secret Service, and Rudy Giuliani's Special Task Force and Emergency Management offices. The damage that was presented later showed that the structural damage was not actually compromising the main support pillars. But the building was evacuated. Then many witnesses heard explosions and noticed fires erupting inside the building.
Somebody grabbed my shoulder and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it, you know? So yeah, I want to know what took that building down. I don't think it was a fire, and it certainly wasn't a plane.
But this pre-planned demolition was almost revealed on national and international television when a BBC reporter announced the collapse of the Tower 7 20 minutes before it fell, with the tower still in the background behind her on the television screen. The feed was immediately cut.
That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
Silverstein announced that the building will be pulled, and the Naudet brothers were there to get their second lucky shot of the day. Afterwards, the view showed the damage to surrounding buildings that did not fall. It is apparent that there was not enough damage done to World Trade Center 7 to necessitate its removal.
Most could not see the alleged impact point due to the complex topography and landscape, and admit to running, dropping, or flinching for cover, explaining why they did not see the plane flying away. But their independent and unanimous placement of the plane on the north side amounts to proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it did fly away without hitting the building. Although the witnesses presented so far did not see the plane flying away, we know that some did. Pentagon police officer Roosevelt Roberts Jr. saw the plane flying away immediately after the explosion. He was at the Pentagon South parking lot loading dock only a few steps inside the building during the explosion, but immediately ran outside and saw the plane flying away. He officially testified to this in a recorded interview for the Library of Congress on November 30th, 2001, only weeks after the event.
And then my sergeant, Sergeant Woolridge, Woody, he called and he said, "Hey, Rob, listen, we're going to Threadcon Delta." As I hang up the phone, the plane hit the building. It all came at the same time. Watching the TV, it was almost timed for preciseness. So as I hung up the phone and I ran to the center of the dock and I looked up, and I saw another plane flying around the south parking lot. It's about like 9:12, 9:11 in the morning. And then there was dust and stuff coming from the ceilings, and you could hear people screaming. So what I did was I turned around and I drew out my weapon. I didn't know what was going on. I thought we was being invaded. I didn't know what was happening.
Although Roosevelt was incorrect about the time and assumes what he saw was, quote, another plane flying away from the Pentagon immediately after the explosion, neither witnesses nor official records support two planes near the Pentagon at the time of the attack. Roosevelt describes witnessing a commercial jet immediately after the explosion, almost as low as the light poles, and we directly confirmed these critical details with him over the phone in May of 2008.
Let me just ask you a couple of quick questions. There was mainly a couple of specific things. When you had mentioned, right as you hung up the phone, you ran outside. Which parking lot, which dock were you at?
I was in South Parking, and I was at the East Loading Dock when I ran outside and saw the low-flying aircraft above the parking lot.
Okay. Was it a jet, or was it do you remember what kind of plane it was?
It looked like to me at that time a large aircraft liner.
Like a.
It wasn't a jet. It was a commercial aircraft.
Okay. Did it have propellers or did it have jet engines?
It looked like jet engines at that time.
Jet engines. Okay. So how close were you to running outside? Because this seemed to be pretty quick, at least from what your account sounded like. It sounded like literally the explosion happened and then you ran outside. I mean, do you remember how many seconds it was when you heard the explosion and then saw that plane?
From the time the explosion hit till I ran outside. It's a loading dock, and you can run right out to the look out and look off. And then you see the flickering lights inside the area, and then real quick I realized that it was some sort of attack, and there was going to be a countermeasure with it.
Right. So how many seconds would you guess?
Maybe 10 seconds tops.
10 seconds tops?
10 seconds tops. Upon impact, I stepped out the little booth that I was in, and the distance between that booth and the edge of that dock is about maybe, I'm like 7 steps away from there.
Wow.
So it was extremely close. You could see that plane just as clear as day. Couldn't miss it.
What color was it? Do you remember?
It was, to me, at that time, it looked like it was silver in color.
Like silver in color, but you saw it over the south parking lot.
Right, and it was like banking just above the light poles, like.
Okay. And
had to been no more than 50 feet. It was less than 100 feet.
Wow. Okay.
Because it banked out, and it was like U-turning, coming around and coming out. It looked like, for those brief seconds, it looked like how do I want to say this? It missed the wrong target, and it was going like out of the way, like back to the airport or something like that.
Oh, like so it's headed towards the airport. It looked like.
Well, no, not heading towards the airport. It's almost like if a pilot misses good, he'll try to do a banking and come around because he missed the target. He missed the landing zone.
Got it. And are you 100% sure it was a jet, an actual jet plane?
Commercial aircraft.
Commercial aircraft, okay.
Roosevelt Roberts did not see the plane approach because he was inside the Pentagon at the time of the explosion. He saw it banking and flying away at less than 100 feet, only after running outside immediately after the explosion. This is why he thought it was another plane. Roosevelt could have only seen the same relatively slow banking plane that all the other witnesses reported approaching on the north side flight path. There is additional evidence that more people saw the plane continue past the Pentagon. Arlington National Cemetery employee Eric Deal was officially recorded by the Center for Military History on December 13, 2001. Although he personally did not see the plane, he said the first thing people reported was that a bomb went off and that a jet kept on going.
A number of us were working Building 123 right after the explosion. Was like a double boom, kind of shook us, almost knocked us out of our chairs. We got up and ran outside, and the first few seconds very confusing. We couldn't even tell. Some people were yelling that a bomb had hit the Pentagon and the jet kept on going. Some people were yelling that a bomb had hit the Pentagon and the jet kept on going.
Witness Maria de la Cerda is a military musician who is in Arlington Cemetery and not only supports the north side approach, but she also said that she thought that it struck the, quote, other side. Maria's account was documented by the Center for Military History, February 6, 2002, interview number 567. We confirmed Maria's account with her directly in May 2008.
Another interesting thing you said in the interview was that you were surprised that the damage was to the side of the Pentagon that you were facing, and that you thought it had actually hit on the other side.
Yeah, my mind's eye, I saw it hit on top.
On top.
And I saw it lift up a little bit.
One eyewitness said it appeared that the pilot went to the side of the building, not directly in. Again, the one witness seemed to think that the pilot tried to avert going directly in.
My sense of it was not that it was a side impact, but rather that it was on top. My sense of it was not that it was a side impact, but rather that it was on top.
Maria did not report the low and level approach depicted by the ASCE, the security video, and required by the physical damage. Now that we've established how the witnesses support a banking north side approach with nothing on the south side, this means the damaged light poles and taxicab had to have been staged. As unanimously demonstrated by the witnesses, the plane was nowhere near the 5 down light poles. But it was furthest from light pole number 1, which is what cab driver Lloyd England claims he lifted out of the windshield of his cab minutes after the attack. Specifications obtained from the Virginia Department of Transportation reveal that this light pole stood 40 feet tall and weighed 247 pounds. Not a single photograph exists showing the pole inside the cab. Not a single witness exists who says they saw the pole inside the cab or the cab driver removing the pole. Most importantly, they all say the plane was nowhere near the light poles. Yet Lloyd claims he came to a stop sideways on the road, with the over 30-foot long light pole still sticking out over the hood. And that a silent stranger helped him remove the pole from the car.
A car was coming, well, I guess you call it more or less a van, and I asked the guy, would he help me get the pole out? So he stopped, he never said a word. I said, man, it's mighty quiet, it's so quiet. And he never said a word. He helped me get the pole out. The pole happened to be bent when we pulled the pole out, and the pole was bent, and the bent part took me down to the ground. I fell down on my back, but I held the pole up and laid the pole down, and he got in his van and went on down the road.
This would mean that a 90-ton Boeing traveling 530 miles per hour factored with the kinetic energy of the cab traveling about 40 miles per hour in the opposite direction, would surely cause at least some damage to the hood of his car.
And to clarify, it was the large piece of the base.
It's the large piece that was sticking out across the hood.
Wow.
The pole came right on through to the back seat. If anybody had been sitting in the back, sitting in the front on the right side, the pole would have went through them.
Sure. And it actually was laying on your head then?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But There are no scratches on the hood.
The sheer weight and length of the pole, in context with the physics of the scenario described by Lloyd, when compared with the total lack of damage to the hood of the cab, reveals a situation that is beyond implausible. But don't forget, the witnesses proved the plane was nowhere near the bridge, light pole number 1, or the cab, explaining why this scene is so questionable and beyond physically implausible. Lloyd was confronted with this information in June of 2008 and had a very odd reaction. Before the on-camera interview began, unaware he was being audio recorded, Lloyd let it slip that he knew his cab and the light pole were on the bridge.
One guy took pictures. He lives right over on 17th Street.
He took pictures of the event?
And he was up on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
He was up on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
He was up on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
He took pictures of the pole.
Oh, the pole, right.
He took pictures of the car.
Right.
And as far as I know, he still has them.
But when the camera started, Lloyd said the complete opposite and refused to admit he was anywhere near the bridge. So what's up? That's the big question, Lloyd. I mean, you said the government never did anything, never investigated your cab or took it in for evidence, right?
No, they did not. And I was interviewed by the FBI once they knew I was still alive, because my wife works for them. And
she works for the FBI?
Yeah, and she said that they were saying that they had a problem trying to locate me. She said, well, I see him every day.
Here's what's going on, Lloyd. We've talked to dozens of people, like I said.
No problem.
Most of them saw the plane for a big long time coming.
Right.
All these guys, they were at Arlington Cemetery right here in the maintenance buildings. We talked to all the people who were at the Citgo station right here. Now, your car on the road, on the side of the road, in this picture, was right here.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, we got pictures of it. Here it is.
My car is not there.
No, we got pictures of it.
No, my car was not there.
I can pull it up. I'll show you.
I don't care what you do. My car was at the Pentagon. My car was not across this bridge.
It was on this bridge. I'll show you the picture.
No, it wasn't. My car was back here. It was not down here. This is Columbia Pike. What was it doing here? That's where I was driving. I came up off of, I'm coming from Roslyn. And coming from Roslyn, what we call H Road.
So where are you trying to say the car was here?
The car was back here.
Okay. It says, we know that the poles were down here. So you're saying the car was like up here.
That's right.
After a road trip to go physically examine Lloyd's cab from 9/11 that he had preserved under a tarp 90 miles away on his other property in the country, we were able to show him the images proving his scene with the cab and the pole was just south of the bridge. This picture right here, here you are, you see? The car's kind of surrounded by these guys. There's the pole right here. Now see what this is? That's the cobblestone from the bridge. Now take a look at this. Come over here. Here's the bridge right here. Now there's your cab. It's sideways on the side of the road. With the hole in it, the pole's laying down right over there. The pole used to be up right here. This is pole number 1. Well, you're right on the bridge.
No.
That's your cab, right? Look close. See that?
Facing the wrong way.
No, it's facing the same way. Facing the same way it was right here. This is taken from the other side. This way it's facing. Look at that one.
I've never seen that picture there before.
You never saw it? This is Jason Ingersoll. He was a Navy military photographer. Here's your cab, right?
That's not.
See your cab? See it? There's the grill. You see you right here. You're wearing the cap.
Yeah, I see it.
All right. Now there's the pole. That's your pole. See the bend?
Yeah.
That's the pole you pulled out, right? There's your cab. I mean, it couldn't be any other pole. The lamp is down next to it. But see how it's got the cobblestone?
I see the sign.
That's the sign.
But that's that.
And that's the cobblestone.
That's not.
From the bridge.
I see that from the bridge, but that's not where it happened.
Well, how come? It's not where it happened. Well, how did they get there then?
I can't explain that. I've never seen that before.
You never saw?
I've never seen that. The bridge, where the plane went across and where the pole came in, there was no bridge. He took this to the pole, he took this to the car, he was up on the bridge.
But that's the bridge.
That is a bridge, but that's not the bridge.
Well, there's only one bridge in the area.
I know, but that's not where I was.
There's the cab, right?
Okay.
That's the bridge. Here's the signs.
That's not where it happened.
What? So what about this image? Are you suggesting, well, is this your cab?
The only thing I can say is where it happened is it's not on the bridge.
This is what I'm not getting. You're saying, like right here, you can see your cab, right?
I see a cab, yeah.
Well, you see how it's got the hole in there. It's the same cab we just went to go see on your property.
Okay.
And this is from 9/11. You see it smoking still. And there's the bridge. This is the south of the bridge. That's the sign right there.
How far is that smoke back?
I don't even care about that. All I know is you're to the south of the bridge.
But I'm not.
Lloyd continued to refuse to admit that the photographs prove he was located on the bridge. But he already let it slip minutes before the earlier interview started that he knew his neighbor took pictures of his cab and the light pole on the bridge. This proves that Lloyd was deliberately changing his position on the highway for the interview to match up with where all the witnesses saw the plane. We later that night went with Lloyd to obtain the independent photographs from his neighbor, and of course even these images confirmed the same southern position of the cab shown in all other images. Yet Lloyd continued to deny that this is where he was located. Immediately after obtaining the images, we drove to the scene of the crime.
I did not come around that way. Not down at this bridge. And he was up on the bridge.
Mm-hmm. Even the picture your friend Mike just showed us.
I can see.
You see that, right?
I can see.
How can that be?
Well, I'm only telling you what happened.
You're telling us something that's completely different from the picture.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, we're on the north side again. You're saying, where were you?
I'm saying that
you weren't even
where these signs are right here.
Were these signs right here?
Right here. These signs right here where I was at.
Before them,
right.
North of them.
No, this is where the pictures were taken.
No, they weren't. There's no cobblestone there.
Well, I'm telling you, that's where I was.
There's no cobblestone.
That's where I was.
This is the signs that you see in the images.
I understand that, but that's where I was.
These are the images. The VDOT pole, the VDOT camera pole, all of that. The cobblestone. Look at the cobblestone bridge. That's you. You're standing right next to it. See that?
I have no problem with that. I was not down.
See the cobblestone?
I was not here.
That's where you were.
I was not here.
Lloyd was much more candid when he didn't realize he was being recorded.
You know what his story is? Just what I said. You got to understand what you're saying. Not the truth. It's his story. Right. It has nothing to do with the truth. It's his story. This is too big for me, man. This is a big thing. Man, you know, this is a world thing happening. I'm a small man. You know, right. My lifestyle is completely different from this.
Right.
I'm not supposed to be involved in this. This is for other people who have money and all this kind of stuff.
But you said, wait, what do you mean?
Well, I'm not supposed to be involved in this. I don't have nothing.
So is your point that these people that have all the money,
this is their thing.
This is their event.
This is for them.
Meaning they're doing it for their own reasons.
That's right. I'm not supposed to be in it.
But they used you, right?
I'm in it.
You're in it.
Yeah, we came across the highway together.
You and their event.
That's right.
But they must have planned that.
It was planned. One thing about it, you got to understand something. when people do things and get away with it, eventually it's going to come to me. And when it comes to me, it's going to be so big I can't do nothing about it. And when it comes to me, it's going to be so big I can't do nothing about it. So it has to be stopped in the beginning when it's small to keep it from spreading.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Lloyd, in essence, admitted his involvement in the 9/11 black operation, but he was cautious not to outright confess. He worked hard to distance himself from the planners, while admitting it was planned. Regardless of Lloyd's true level of involvement, the independent evidence for a north side approach proves the cab and light pole scene staged, and that the plane did not hit the Pentagon.
I'd taken my son, put his stroller beside my desk, I went to turn on the computer, boom. And at that moment, our life was completely changed on that particular day. Now, here's what I feel like the details that you need to know. When I came to, of course, I was disoriented. I didn't know what had happened, what was going on. I was covered in debris from the back of my neck all the way down to my body. So the only thing that was out was my arms and my head. I shake my head, like, what is going on? What happened? Then all of a sudden I can hear my son crying. He's crying louder and louder and louder. And I'm sure, moms, you know about this. When our children get in distress, all of a sudden we get that super strength, like, we need to find out what's going on, you know. So he stopped crying, and that's what motivated me to low crawl, or really pull myself out from under the debris, move all the debris, and get from under the debris, because he had stopped crying. So my first thought was, oh my God, I come back to work to lose my child. All types of things are going through my head. And so there was fear there. There was so many emotions going on at one time. And I wish one of the things, when I go back and think about it, I think about one of the things I was feeling was courage. I wasn't feeling courageous at that time. I wish I could say it, because I don't know, maybe I feel like you guys would really believe I was a hero. But I really can't say that. I really was very fearful. I was very afraid. And I was very concerned that I'd lost my child on my first day back at work. Regardless of the fact, I was able to get out, and there were a number of things that were going on at that time. There were people who were covered under debris. They were trapped in between the floors saying, help me, save me, screaming. I mean, there were so many things going on at one particular time, and I was split. I had a duty and an obligation, because I was in the military. I had a duty and obligation to help save these people. And then here's my child who now had stopped crying. I'm split, my child, people. So it's very hard. I was reaching under the debris to see if I could reach my child, to see if he was in the immediate area. I couldn't feel him. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to help save some of these people so they can help me find my kid. I couldn't find him. I tried. I was reaching under the debris. I couldn't. So I was able to help a couple of people, and I was saying to myself, help me find my son, help me find my son. And of course, there was a lot of hysteria, so I don't really blame anybody there, because they didn't stop. I mean, they wanted to get out, and I really don't blame them. I really don't. Things were still collapsing on the inside, and you really wasn't comprehending what was going on in your environment, so I didn't blame anybody there. We get to the point where things were collapsing, and my other coworkers, who we still stay in touch with today, were like, we have to go now. We have to go now. But I was thinking I didn't have my son, and at that point I just wanted to leave with his body. So we get to a big just pile of debris, and I had one leg over the pile of debris, and they were holding my arm. It was like two people holding the other arm, telling me, come on, pulling me, saying, come on. I'm like, I just got to try just one more time. And I reached down, just sheer chance, no science to it, no method to it. I just reached down, and I grabbed my son's onesie. And I pulled the onesie up, and I put him over my shoulder, and then they pulled me by the other arm. And then as soon as they pulled me out over that place of debris, that area, more things had collapsed in that area. So it just all happened in time enough for us to really get out. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. But there was no science to it. There was no method to it. There was no strategy, no plan. It just simply happened. Now here's what was key. As we were moving out, I was still able to see pillars that were still holding up the actual area. I mean, not very many. There was some still knocked down. There were still wires. I didn't see any plane debris. I didn't see any airplane seats. I didn't see any metal. I didn't see any baggage. I wasn't covered in jet fuel. I know the people that we helped pulled out under the different floors, I didn't see them covered in any jet fuel. I just didn't see it. And so at the time, after the fact, that's all I was thinking. That's what I didn't see. But I know what I saw. And most of the debris that we were encompassed with, or what we were going through, was pertaining to office things. Concrete, books, computers, tables, things of that effect. So we get out on the lawn as we come out of the actual hole where they claim that's where the plane entered. As I come out, I'm thinking all of a sudden someone had taken a hammer and literally beat me from my head all the way down to my feet, and then I collapsed. There was a gentleman who was helping people as they were coming out. He captured my son as I was going down to the ground. He got a gentleman to help hold Elijah while he moved me to another location on the lawn. Now, I really don't know how they determined rank structure because I had my civilian clothes on, but most of the higher, ranking people who had been affected were already transported out for triage, and we were left on the ground. So the people who were surrounding us was just trying to stop cars to get us to the hospital. But while I was on the lawn, I can't say that I saw a silver piece of a plane part. I didn't see any of that, and that's the only thing that I really feel like I can attest to, because those are things that I didn't see. So with that in mind, I would have never have believed that it was a plane, simply because I didn't see particular things. And based off the Pentagon renovation team, they did a mapping of where everybody was and what was the feet, or where they were located, to determine how far away they were from an impact. And it was just communicated to me we were maybe 35 to 45 feet away from place of impact, more or less 3 or 5 feet. So I feel like, if that's the case, surely there would have been something to support particular things. But again, I stick to, my account and the things that I saw. I don't know what was more horrifying. I don't know if it was actually having the experience or the life, after 9/11. Of course, they wanted to train us, or specifically communicate to us how they wanted us to express what is a story, what happened, and I couldn't do that because these were things that I know I did not see. So I could not support their official story because there were things that I did not see. And I can't say that they specifically communicated that I will not say this and that I will not say that, but I can say, they wanted to ensure that we communicated things as they made the official story. I'm sure many of you are aware of what the official story is, and I just couldn't do that based off, what I saw on the inside. Also, the other inappropriate thing was the fact that my 2.5-month child was cleared to go back there. That was the other number two. They didn't want me to communicate that my son had been injured in that particular location. They felt like that was very inappropriate for me to share with the public. And again, I could not do that because then how would my son get his continuous care? How would he get his treatment? I mean, what was I going to tell the doctors? What was I going to say? How was I going to explain how he got hurt? He had a sunken, when they're newborn babies, their head is already soft, but a large portion of his head had been sunken in. Plus, he was bleeding from the nose. There were just issues. And so it wasn't when I was asking those particular questions I was given specific answers. It was the fact that they didn't make particular statements. What was I supposed to say? What was I supposed to tell the doctors? And if you didn't want to address that, then again, that was, a red flag. And that's a brief, overall synopsis of my experience.
The vision of threats to America and protection of its citizens was playing out like a card trick, where the participants were unknowingly being misdirected and controlled by the real operators behind the game.
9/11, it's been told by the major media, and frankly, that story is a dog. As you can see, right here, this looks like a 757 that hit the Pentagon. But is it or isn't? Let's investigate. Well, you may believe that because you've been told that, but which one's a 757? The one you've been told or the one that you couldn't see? And also, regardless of what hit the Pentagon, Wedge 1, Captain Gerald DeCanto's office, Is it possible that this airplane could fly the maneuver that it was alleged to have been flying on that day? According to the official transcript of the incident, the three-dimensional flight path of the object that hit the Pentagon was somewhat like this. It flew over the Pentagon at 7,000 feet. Thereupon, it started a right wing down, very nose-low descent at 540 miles an hour, rolled out just inside the grassy knoll, descended to 15 feet, went between four wooden reels, and struck the Pentagon here. And that location on the Pentagon was the Naval Command Center, where Captain Gerald DeCanto was on the phone inside his office at the Naval Command Center when whatever the object was flew into his office and killed him. Gerald DeCanto was reaching for the phone to call one of his superiors requesting to engage the target that was attacking the Pentagon because they had broken the rules of engagement on that day. Gerald DeCanto was reaching for the phone to call one of his superiors requesting to engage the target that was attacking the Pentagon because they had broken the rules of engagement on that day. There were multiple air defense exercises going on, and the rules of engagement called for the limitation of the threatening aircraft, which would have been a member of the Red Air Team. When it got to 3 minutes of the Pentagon, it was supposed to abort its attack and knock off the fight. But that's not what happened on that day. When the flying object got to 25 miles, it pressed the attack. Captain Gerald DeCanto determined that there was a double cross going on, and Gerald DeCanto tried to reach somebody in authority to allow him to launch defensive weapons. Shortly after it leveled off heading west towards California, a second airplane flew in right behind it in a formation such as this, within the range of 400 to 700 feet, so as to be invisible to radar. And the second airplane was a drone. There were no humans in it. There was not a cockpit crew, and there were certainly no passengers. And its purpose was to be right behind Flight 77 until such a time as the coordinated simultaneously attacks on the World Trade Center, the U.S. Capitol, and the Pentagon were assured. And the third airplane was the CL-144, which a lot of you in North America and the West recognize as an RJ built by CL or Bombardier. Notice it's white. There's no letters, there's no numbers, there's no identification, and there's no flag. And so what was this mysterious white airplane that was flying behind the drone when the drone was flying behind Captain Chick Burlingame?
Anyway, last night was a revelation.
Good.
So here's the question. You say we know that a 757 did not hit the Pentagon.
Right.
Concisely, how do we know that it wasn't a 757?
Because the 757 could not have performed the maneuver immediately prior to the penetration of the Pentagon.
Okay, so it descends. Okay, let me stop you. It descends from 7,000 feet above the Pentagon, makes a very steep nosedive, and then levels out at 10 feet and goes for a pretty considerable distance at 10 or 15 feet above the ground.
Yeah, okay. Are you trying to record me now?
I am recording you, Field.
Okay, well, just tell me when to go. From my understanding of the trajectory of the aerospace vehicle that crossed the Pentagon at 7,000 feet, then commenced a rapidly descending right-hand turn, I believe the G loading on the wings of the 757 would have been more than the airplane was capable of bearing.
Okay, stop right there. So you're saying that if a 757, and probably, if I know what you've said previously, even a 737, a smaller plane, if it had made that type of maneuver, it would have ripped the wings off the plane even before it got down to that Pentagon level, right?
It would have been either or. It would either rip the wings off the airplane or they wouldn't complete the turn and the descent before they hit the ground. In other words, the airplane was not capable of that type of performance.
Okay, and we know that this is the flight trajectory from radar records and from not only radar, but people just there on the scene who watched the plane come in, right?
Right, and the official records that I would refer to are the Washington Center FAA air traffic control sequences of radar film.
I don't know the specific person, but do you recall a quote of somebody watching the radar of that vehicle coming in saying, "This has got to be a military vehicle"?
Yes, I can't put my finger on that, but I've heard that also that they being the approach controllers at the Washington Reagan Airport, as they watched this radar track proceed inbound towards the Pentagon, the controllers themselves were aware of two things: that whatever was doing this type of flying had to be a military, i.e. non-civilian aircraft, and secondly, a woman air traffic controller from Washington Approach Control was caught on tape on 9/11 stating that American 77 had been lost over the Atlantic 45 minutes prior to the events at the Pentagon.
I'm Major General Albert Newton Stubblebine III, U.S. Army retired, and I spent 32 years in the military, and ended up as a Major General. In my last assignment, I was responsible for all of the Army's strategic intelligence forces around the world. 9/11 happens. At the time, my wife and I were in Hawaii. We were attending a conference, and I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 3:30 in the morning, I get a phone call. And it's one of my officers. I'd retired by that time. It was one of my officers who had served under me, and a fabulous officer. And she said, "Sir, the United States is at war." I said, "See, what are you talking about?" She said, "The United States is at war." I said, "Come on, see, what have you been drinking?" She said, "Listen to me. Go turn on the television. The United States is at war." I said, I still didn't believe. I go turn on the television. Bingo, I see the towers coming down. I said, "Oh, that's a joke." I switched channels, towers going down. I switched channels, towers going down. I said, "Oh my God." So I thanked her for the information. I turned to Rima and I said, "You watch. I guarantee you right now that the information about that attack was in the system and somebody missed it." Very important. The information was there to know that that attack was coming, and somebody didn't see the signals. And that's from my own personal intelligence background. All of my experience after that in the intelligence world tells me that when something that big goes by, somebody missed the information. So I was a believer, absolute believer, that the attack was a terrorist attack, that it was all done by other forces. And after that, periods, my wife began to put pieces together, and she said, I don't think that attack was done by the enemy, the terrorists that you indicated. I said, you're wrong. She said, I don't believe it. I said, you're wrong. And so she began to find bits and pieces of information, and she would present them to me, and I said, no, 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 not my government. My government would not tell a lie like that. And I just disbelieved. I was so ingrained in my belief system that I could not believe, I literally could not believe that anybody but a sort of Arab terrorist could do something like that. And then one day, I saw a picture. It was a photograph of the Pentagon and the hole in the Pentagon. And I looked at it and I said, wow. And then I looked at it again. I said, something's wrong. Something's wrong with this picture. Then I kept looking at it. And then I began to not look at it just at a glance, but to study the photograph itself. What's wrong with this picture? Why is your belly saying, my kinesthetic aspect of my processing system, saying something wrong with that picture? Well, there was something wrong. And so I analyzed it, not just photographically, I did measurements, I did all kinds of it. I checked the plane, the length of the nose, where the wings were. I did all of the measurements. I took the measurements of the Pentagon, the depth of the destruction in the Pentagon. Conclusion, airplane did not make that hole. I went public at the time. I am the highest ranking officer, I believe, that has ever gone public. That whatever that story was, the official story, was not true. Now, I was very careful to not say what it was, because I couldn't prove it. I was careful to say it was not the airplane that did that, because I can prove that it was not the airplane. In the hole, however, was a turbine. Looked like the turbine from a missile. I can't prove that, I don't know, but there was something there that did not look like the engine from an airplane, but did look like a turbine from a missile. Later, I saw another photograph of one of the sensors on the outside of the Pentagon. Now, all of the sensors had been turned off, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? That day, why would all of the sensors around the Pentagon be turned off? Ooh, that's strange. I don't care what the excuse is, that's strange. There happened to be one that apparently did not get turned off, and in that picture, coming in, flying into the Pentagon, you see this object. And it obviously hits the Pentagon. When you look at it, it does not look like an airplane. Later, sometime later, after I'd gone public, that imagery was changed. It had, it got a new suit around it that now looked like an airplane. But when you take the suit off, it looks more like a missile, not like an airplane. Let me go back to the next, I think, very important piece of information. The amount of energy required to melt the girders, the steel in the tower, cannot be gotten to a melt point with the fuel that was in the airplane. Not possible. So any melting did not occur as a result of the hit from the airplane. Point. I call it dot, okay? Dot. When you look at the tower coming down, what you see are at each floor successive puffs of smoke. Puff, 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 all the way down. What are the puffs of smoke coming from? Well, they claim they're from the collapsing floors. No, no, no. Those puffs of smoke are controlled demolitions. That's exactly what they are, because that's exactly how they work. And so the fact that the airplane hit, it did not cause that collapse of the building. The collapse of the building was caused by controlled demolition. Fact. Building 7. Silverberg, I believe is the name of the owner, was on video, on a video, and you could see Building 7. You could literally see it. And there was a fire in Building 7. There's no doubt about that. No airplane hit it. I assume that the fire came from some debris, but I'm not even sure of that. But in the lower right-hand corner of the building was a fire. Not a very big fire, didn't appear to be out of control, certainly was in a small part of the building. But then he is heard on the video, okay? And he says, "Pull it." And then the building collapsed. What does pull it mean? What do the words pull it mean? Let me tell you. That's the order for controlled demolition. That is the phraseology that's used for blowing up something. And that's when Building 7 blew up. I understand, I can't prove this, but I've heard that he had just reinsured the building for damages caused by such things as airplanes hitting it or some objects hitting it that had not been in the original contract. Now, I can't prove that. I don't know, but I've heard that. There was another data bit. All of the air defense systems in that part of the country had been turned off that day. All of the air defense systems had been turned off. Why? Apparently because the vice president was out in Colorado and he ordered them turned off. Why would you turn off all of the air defense systems on that particular day unless you knew something was going to happen? It's a dot. It's information. But strange that everything got turned off that day. Dot. There was an exercise that was designed for the air defense systems that was an attack on the towers by airplanes. Isn't that strange that we had an exercise that mimicked what really happened? Strange that we had planned an exercise that was exactly what happened. And at the same time, the air defense systems were turned off. Don't you find that strange? And pretty soon you got a picture. To me, what does the picture say? Picture says that what we heard and were told in the newspapers, the media, was not the real story. If there's enough doubt in the official story where the stories are absolutely not consistent with what happened, that they paint a different picture than the one that was given to the media, how easy is it for you to shift your belief system from I totally believe in my government to oh my God, what's going on? And that's exactly where I went in all of this. Because my belief system so strong from age 5 when I can remember standing on the parade ground at attention without anybody telling me to do that at West Point. I did it because I wanted to do it, because I believed. And then going to the military academy, serving, defending. The real story was, or I have a question, I guess. The real story to me is, who was the real enemy? Who participated in this? Who planned this attack? Why was it planned? Were the real terrorists the people in Arab clothing? Or were the real people that planned this the people sitting in the authority in the White House?
Fox employee is on the phone with us. Mark witnessed this from what we understand. Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
Hi, gentlemen. How you doing? Yeah, there was definitely a blue logo. It was like a circular logo on the front of the plane, definitely towards the front. It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides, and definitely very low. And I'm completely panicked. You're freaking out. I cannot believe what I just saw.
We are all shaken by this. We are watching the video now back live, but the upper floors of the World Trade Center in Manhattan in flames now after apparently 2 large airplanes, we're talking about jetliners here, slammed into the sides right around 9 o'clock this morning. Mark, if what you say is true, those could be cargo planes or something like that. You said you didn't see any windows in the side?
I didn't see any windows in the sides. I saw the plane flying low. I was probably like a block away from the subway in Brooklyn, and that plane came down very low. And again, it was not a normal flight that I've ever seen at an airport. It was a plane that had a blue logo on the front, and it did not look like it belonged in this area.
That depends on the G loading of the flying platform. And when I say flying platform, that means, for the sake of this episode, I believe it was a Navy A-3 Sky Warrior, and I believe that from the dynamics and the trajectory, I believe it would have had a 4G turn, or perhaps a little more.
What does that mean, 4G? That if somebody weighs 200 pounds, they would suddenly weigh 800. They would weigh 4 times as much, 800 pounds.
Yes, a G is just like right now, wherever you're at in Omelet Town, you're under the influence of 1G.
Okay.
Full of gravity. When you accelerate vertically in an airplane, or if you roll it over to the side and accelerate horizontally, but basically if you pull back on the stick or the yoke, you increase the effects of gravity, and airplanes such as the A3 could probably take about 4 Gs, and keep in mind, it very possibly was reinforced at Fort Collins, where it could take more Gs.
Okay.
But an airliner like a 757 or a 737 probably could only take about 2.5 Gs, and if it was being flown by technology,
if they tried to fly more than 2 Gs, the plane would just fall apart, wouldn't it?
yes, the wings would be stressed to the point of fracture.
Okay, gotcha. All right, but I'm asking again about would a pilot flying at, you said 4 Gs, heading virtually straight for the ground, would this pilot be able to, if there was a pilot on that plane, are they likely to actually even remain conscious?
If there was an inexperienced pilot trying to fly the trajectory of the flying object that did in fact hit the Pentagon, if that was an inexperienced pilot, the 4G loading of the maneuver would cause him to be spatially disoriented, and there's no way in the world that a low-time pilot flying an airplane he has no experience in could do a 4G turn for 270 degrees and then roll out 15 or 10 feet above the ground and maintain a constant altitude for the length of a football field as it flies into a building.
And not to mention that the target is the office that's controlling our side of the war games that morning.
Right.
Yeah, this is beyond even the remotest bit of credibility.
It's technologically impossible with a human pilot.
Yeah, okay.
Even an experienced 757 pilot, if there's a 757 pilot out there somewhere that you could find rather than the random one that just happened to have that flight that day, or the Muslim who allegedly took the airplane over, no pilots, whether they're American, United, Delta, no U.S. airline pilot would have experience flying 540 knots below 10,000 feet because it's illegal to do so.
Yeah.
That's not to say that they couldn't knowingly and willfully break the law and fly 540 knots at 10 to 15 feet, but they'd have no experience in having done that, and so they could not have displayed the level of precision that was displayed on 9/11 when the flying object went squarely through the window of the Naval Command Center. That had to be technology flying the flying object, and it's my opinion that the flying object was a privately owned A3 Sky Warrior.
I previously commented that when you're trying to solve a mystery, whether you're Sherlock Holmes or a pilot, a good place to start is to take the official story and eliminate anything that's impossible. The QRS-11 gyro chip was built to be installed in Maverick missiles, which could certainly do this. Boom. And there's your answer. It was not a transport category airplane. It was certainly not American 77. And if any pilot out there could fly this platform in a transport, I'd sure like to shake your hands and go for a ride.
The final moments of Flight 93 are nowhere near what was reported both by the media and by Hollywood. The final moments of Flight 93, as observed by numerous eyewitnesses, included the 757 flying perfectly inverted, straight and level, at treetop level, which is impossible due to the wing loading and the negative G loading of Flight 93, a 757. But more startling is what the eyewitnesses also observed. Flying very close to the inverted Flight 93 was a small white jet with upturned winglets and 2 rear-mounted engines that looked military. There was, other than the white paint, there was no markings, there was no flag, there was no company name. And shortly after the inverted 757 passed by Susan M. and the gentleman farmer, they heard a loud explosion, and the 757, which was vaporized at treetop level, left an 8-mile debris field, including 1 engine, at one end of the debris field and a small circular hole at the other end.
How big was this hole in the ground?
You know, how big was it? I don't even remember.
Now, do you recall any big parts of the plane, like wings, fuselage? Did they recover any big pieces of that plane?
I can give you something good for tape there.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Of course I'm ready.
After studying the final moments of Flight 93 for 5.5 years, my only knowledge of any remnant that's identifiable is one engine was left at one end of the 8-mile debris field. My only knowledge of any remnant that's identifiable is one engine was left at one end of the 8-mile debris field.
These planes, and I think in every case, the plane essentially vaporized.
That's right.
In every case, there were no bodies, there were no seats, there were no big pieces of planes. To me, I draw the analogy between a firecracker. What would cause these planes to act more like firecrackers as opposed to a regular jet? What would allow these planes to vaporize either on impact or at a chosen time, such as Flight 93 would have done?
Pre-placed explosives that appear to be insulation. So what I'm suggesting is that well-intentioned technicians at aircraft modification factories, thinking they're sticking insulation in, either sound-absorbing or vibrational insulation or thermal insulation, these well-meaning technicians could in fact be installing sheets of explosives, and there's pictures of that on the web at Hawks Cafe.
Solid rocket looks and behaves exactly like insulation until it's ignited at this tremendous
5,800 degrees.
Yeah, in other words, you could crash a plane into a building,
right,
and it still wouldn't ignite this solid rocket fuel to explode, but you could ignite it with a separate, a separate ignition source. At which point, then the solid rocket fuel installed as retrofitted insulation would then ignite.
That's right.
And what this brings to mind is the footage that I got from Dylan Avery, which shows this flash occurring as the second plane hits the Twin Towers.
Right.
You see the secondary flash like a missile or something, that's happening as the plane is entering the building.
Right.
It's almost like a missile is being fired into the building that will then ignite some other ignition source. We are conjecturing that will then ignite this retrofitted solid rocket fuel insulation, and cause the kind of explosion that we see on rocket liftoffs when solid rocket fuel explodes. Okay, hear about the fireball. We see the planes go into the building and there's this big... would a jet, even when it was filled with rocket fuel, going into a building, would you expect to see that kind of fireball from jet fuel alone in that type of situation?
No. Jet fuel has a very high flash point, and so just like diesel fuel on the over-the-road truckers, they can get in terrible collisions, and yet they generally don't catch on fire. And the same is true of jet fuel because of the nature of the mission, which is to haul people safely in steel or aluminum enclosures flying 500 miles an hour. The fuel has to be very stable, and being very flammable would be a hazard, so it's as inflammable as it can be made.
Jet fuel and kerosene are virtually the same thing, right?
Yes, jet fuel and kerosene.
Right, so kerosene and jet fuel, they don't cause this fireball like gasoline would.
No, it wouldn't.
You got to have something else igniting something else to make that big, showy movie fireball, right?
That's what I would suggest. You'd need an ignition source.
If you look closely, you'll notice that the shadow of the plane meets the building after the flash occurs. This means that the flash is not the fuselage colliding with the building, but rather a separate event. Not to mention that the flash is twice as wide as the fuselage itself. Within minutes of the attack, news teams from all over the city had their cameras trained on the World Trade Center. Therefore, the second impact was covered by almost every conceivable angle. This footage was shot by CNN. On the underside of the fuselage, an extra piece of equipment is visible. When questioned about this, Boeing representatives refused to discuss it. This is what the underside of a Boeing 767 should look like. The following footage is taken from the documentary Why the Towers Fell. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bring it back. Did you catch that? A missile is fired seconds before impact. Skeptics claim that the flash is the fuselage colliding with the building. If that were the case, it would look like this. Flash is also present in footage taken by Evan Fairbanks, Jennifer Spell, and CNN. Al-Qaeda certainly couldn't have added this equipment at Logan International Airport. And even if they did, the flight crew would have noticed it. So where did this plane come from?
The drone, alleged to be Flight 175 at 1,000 feet, 350 knots, just struck the second tower where the black smoke from the inefficient fire in the first tower is still visible. Here it is again, striking a second time. This time we can see at the end of the red arrow a small white jet, perhaps a CL-604. The third time it strikes, and this time the small white jet is more plainly visible, and it appears to be in a left-hand, shallow climbing left-hand turn. And from the next couple of pictures we will see some shadows. There they are. There's a shadow amidships on the right side of the fuselage and a shadow at the tail, and that's created because it's in a left-hand turn and the sunlight is no longer reflecting off the side of the airplane. It's being shadowed by the upraised wing. Once again, the variant of the 767 has struck the building. We know from scientific research and knowledge that the jet fuel, if it was mixed properly with oxygen or air, it would not have that black smoke. The black smoke is indicative of a fairly cool fire that's inefficiently burning the jet fuel, which really throws a lot of doubt onto the official story that the fuel was so intense that it melted the steel structures that held up the 1,365-foot average twin towers.
I worked there for 20 years and I was a janitor, the person that cleaned all the floors. The building has 6 up-levels of basement. The support companies for the cleaning of the World Trade Center were located on B1. While I was there at 8:46, all of a sudden we hear boom, an explosion so hard that pushed us up. When I went to verbalize it, like 6 seconds after, we hear that boom, that impact all the way on the top. So 2 different events. And at that very moment, when I said, "Oh my God," a guy comes running into the office, and this guy had his hands extended, both arms like this, and his skin was pulled totally from both arms, and it was hanging from the top of the fingertips like it was clothing. And I thought at that time that it was clothing. And when I went to say something, I realized, I look at his face, I realized that he had missing parts of his face.
He had, on that particular day, the only master key. He went up with a master key, unlocking door after door so firemen could get in. And he himself, I think he said, brought out 15 or 20 people.
So I started opening the doors, of the stairwells so people could escape.
Willie was made a hero, and he was at the White House. And we have a picture of that, of George Bush honoring Willie Rodriguez for being a hero.
We hear boom, 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 different explosions. And I asked the fire department, I said, what is this explosion? And what they said was, maybe it's the gas tank from the kitchen. No! The kitchens were all electrical, so that didn't make any sense.
I heard a loud explosion, an explosion that I had never heard in my whole life, an enormous explosion.
My ears were hearing loud explosions at ground level, very mysterious. Explosions that seemed to be at ground level as opposed to high in the air.
There's no question in my mind that those buildings, based on the law of physics, could not have collapsed without the assistance of a bomb.
No! When I hear another explosion, no! I think it's a bomb.
Willie has taken the really 180% turn of events, saying here that President Bush, who had honored him being a hero, he's named on this lawsuit as accusing Bush and Cheney and Senior Bush and others of murder. And he's not doing it for any monetary gain, because this has just cost us everything. Willie has lost his home, lost his job. Right now, his goal is to find out the truth.
We received these audio tapes that were obtained 3 months before September 11, 2001, from a different field office, Iranian informant who'd been on FBI's payroll for 10 years, since about 1991, 1992, in April 2001. And in April 2001, this informant told the FBI that on a separate issue, he had obtained information about Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, issuing an attack in the United States that would involve 5 major cities, and it will involve airplanes, and that the attack was going to take place within the next few months. They took the information, they found it important, they filled out forms, they came back to the headquarters, and then they filed it. They gave it to the superiors, right? Nothing happened. 2 months later, they met with the same informant again. And the informant asked, he said, did you do something with that information I gave you, because it came from really reliable sources? And the agent said, yes, we gave it to our superiors. Well, nothing happened. Nobody followed up on this.
They discovered Ramzi Youssef's computer with the Bojinka plan in 1996 in the Philippines. It talked about taking hijacked planes and running them into the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol, the CIA headquarters, and the Twin Towers. The Pentagon staged an exercise a year before, in October of 2000, at the site with the Arlington County Fire Department to simulate a plane running into the Pentagon and how the fire responders would get there and what they would do. So this was not outside the box or, you know, out in the blue. They not only expected it, they prepared for it.
One of the most frequent declarations made by the Bush administration was that these attacks took us by surprise.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that they would try to use an airplane as a missile, a hijacked airplane as a missile.
And I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
Secondo USA Today, dal 1999,
according to USA Today, in 1999, the American Air Force conducted special exercises 4 times per year in which the hijacking of civil aeroplanes by terrorists was simulated. The selected targets were the Twin Towers and the Pentagon.
I don't think anybody could have
the prior
predicted.
government that could envision flying airplanes in the buildings.
Could have predicted.
I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes in the buildings.
On the 11th of September 2002, the New York Times wrote, "1 year later, the public knows less about the circumstances of 2,801 deaths at the foot of Manhattan in broad daylight than people in 1912 knew within weeks about the Titanic."
5 years after that article, what happened that day is still a mystery.
My name's Bob McIlvaine. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I lost my son Bobby, who was age 26 on September 11th, 2001. He had just gotten a job at Merrill Lynch. Already, it always hits you blind. And, don't worry, I'll get over it. But I mean, anytime you just mention that day, it's like the pain just comes shooting up. And of course, when you keep doing this, it's, you think it gets better, but it just never gets better.
The conclusions that the 9/11 Commission came to have been very disappointing. A lot of evidence has been ignored. Many witnesses were not called to testify. The final report glosses over a great many key issues.
A few days before 9/11, Mohammed Atta received a huge sum of money, about $100,000, money which was delivered by a Pakistani Secret Service officer. And the big scandal is that the 9/11 Commission of the US Congress never interrogated this man and never tried to bring light into the story of this 100,000.
While everybody was doing testimony televised to the whole nation, mine was behind closed door. Now, why would they want that behind closed door? That didn't make any sense. Anyway, I told them exactly the same argument that we have here, that we heard explosions, that people were burned, that prior the building getting hit by the plane, that these people were alive and they were available to be interrogated. And wow, what a surprise. The final report comes out. They didn't even mention my name, doesn't appear anywhere. They didn't call, not even once, any of the witnesses that we gave them. So you have 17 firefighters, you have 22 survivors, and they didn't call not even one of them.
Specifically me as a parent, I have an obligation to find out who murdered my son. The commission gave me nothing. 9/11 Commission was not an investigation.
Remember, the entire bin Laden family was on one of the planes later. They'd been collected from all over the United States, and they were whisked out of the country with the speed of light while the Pentagon was still burning.
So they asked Mueller, who authorized these people to leave the country? Well, someone in the State Department. Well, can you tell us who? He said, well, I don't recall. I don't recall. Another instance, General Myers. This is later on in the commission. They asked about Moussaoui. Do you recall getting any information concerning Moussaoui? His answer was, I don't recall. I don't recall. I don't recall. Ashcroft, Attorney General. Picard was the FBI head during the summer. He had testified that they had all these warnings, 71 different warnings about something happening this summer. And Ashcroft sat there and lied. So I didn't know these things. I didn't know these warnings. We were paying attention to terrorism.
No warning signs that I'm aware of.
Anybody
And I don't think the
could
prior
have
government
predicted.
could envision flying airplanes in the buildings.
These people lied, and our government protected them. It was obvious they were lying. These people that people were testifying should have gone. Mueller should be in jail. Ashcroft should be in jail. Condoleezza Rice should be in jail.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that they would try to use
airplanes in the buildings.
Starting in 1993, I was an official for the government of the United States. I worked as a contractor for lots of different agencies, mainly, though, with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. With the FBI, we did counterterrorism training, things like that. I've been in many of the installations of the United States government that could be characterized as top secret or at least high security.
Era lo que se dice en Argentina un hombre de confianza.
Sí, sí. When the World Trade Center was attacked, I was the one that they called probably about 10 to 12 minutes after the first airplane struck the North Tower. The first thing that my boss said to me was turn on CNN, and so I turned on the television, and there is where I saw the North Tower with a hole in it and smoke coming out, and the graphics below said that a small airplane had crashed into the World Trade Center.
I remember that.
That's all we knew.
A Kurt Sonnenfeld siempre le llamó la atención que su jefe lo convocara a trabajar cuando aún no se sabía que lo que estaba pasando iba a ser un desastre nacional. Kurt fue el único camarógrafo que pudo entrar a las ruinas de las Torres Gemelas.
Investigations after, nobody knew. It was a complete surprise. But to me,
but your boss knew.
My boss not only called me too early, but he was at work too early. He normally began work at 9 a.m. This day it was before 7 a.m. when he called me, and he called from his office. In New York, it's 2 hours time difference from Colorado, where I lived. The first attack happened around 8:50 in the morning, so it was 6:50 in the morning where I lived in Colorado. My boss was also in Colorado. So that struck me as strange.
Sus tomas fueron las únicas que se vieron en todo el mundo. Era el único camarógrafo con acceso total a la zona del desastre.
Total access. There was total access. Yes. One of the first things that the government did was to close the perimeter of Ground Zero and prohibit all media from entering. Every 5 meters around the perimeter, you would see a sign hanging that said all cameras and video cameras are prohibited. Violators will be prosecuted and their equipment will be confiscated. In other words, they were very paranoid about other cameras being present. In other words, they refused to allow the media to come in. They refused to allow any cameras in except for the official government cameras.
Except you.
Right. And I was given very specific instructions. I was told, number one, that I was supposed to videotape for the investigation, and number two, to provide images to the media of the world. So any images that you saw of Ground Zero in the immediate days after the attacks on the World Trade Center were taken by me.
Do you still have that tapes?
Yes, I do. I took 25 hours of tapes, and I still have them in my possession. Miraculously enough, after all that I've been through, it's amazing that I've been able to retain some things, because there have been some attempts to get them back. The reason that they gave was that it was a crime scene, and therefore they didn't want journalists destroying the evidence. But almost from day one, they began taking away all of the metal beams and driving trucks all over the evidence, and in fact took the metal beams out to Fishkill Island, which was then shipped to China to be melted down into scrap metal. So they themselves were destroying evidence almost purposely and programmatically from the very first days. The only video that they release is sanitized. I was given instructions to...
What's sanitized?
Sanitized. I was told not to show any bodies, any parts of bodies. any firemen or policemen or soldiers crying or having a personal moment, as they called it, personal effects of any people that might have perished on September 11th. For example, if I showed somebody's yellow sweater laying on the ground, maybe that person's widow was watching television, still waiting for word whether or not her husband had died or was just missing, you know. So I wasn't able to show anything like that. But also it was highly stressed that I do not get any images of the documents laying around, because at Ground Zero there were millions and millions of papers floating around everywhere. It was really kind of surrealistic how much paper survived. The concrete...
It was a business center, a real business center.
Financial center and government center. Both
government center too?
Yeah, both of which love their documents, you know. But no, it's I don't know if it's well known, but the World Trade Center had many offices of government agencies. Had at the building number 6, for example, was U.S. Customs, which is a more militarized. It's not like the aduana here. It's militarized, and they can make arrests. They can store evidence. They can
weapons and drugs.
It's a police force that controls who and what comes in and out of the country. And for example, if they catch drugs or weapons or even nuclear material.
I remember you see something strange in customs office.
Yes, I did. But that building 6 was almost completely, if not completely, government offices. In Building 7 also was offices for the Department of Defense, FBI, Secret Service. It was also then discovered, too, that was the largest clandestine office of the CIA outside of Virginia was in Building 7. That office was used to spy on the United Nations, as well as all of the international
the CIA was spying on the United Nations.
On the United Nations and on the World Trade Center as well. They were spying on the international financial agencies there. I find that the majority of people know nothing about Building 7. Everybody knows the North and South Tower fell on September 11th. Very few people know that a third tower fell 9 hours afterwards. That's Building 7. Was not hit by any airplane. Did not have any significant structural damage when the other towers fell.
And Building 7 were the CIA station?
Yes. In addition to that, it fell in 6.5 seconds, a 47-story building, and it fell perfectly straight down, vertically, in upon itself, just like you see when they implode a building. In fact, implosion engineers have said, we can only dream about such a perfect job. But you can also see little explosions coming out as it's falling.
Like an implosion.
Exactly like an implosion. And so I found that very few people know about Building 7, and it's because in the 9/11 Commission report, Building 7 is not even mentioned.
No untracked aircraft get near the Pentagon and near the White House. It just doesn't happen.
In Washington, D.C., we have one of the most restricted airspaces in the world. It's called P-56. It has a separate radar tracking system and a separate military response system.
P-56 is that restricted airspace that is around the Pentagon and the White House, and it is a highly, highly, highly sensitive area. There are supposed to be no unknown aircraft that can go through there.
That has an air defense identification zone in a 50-mile radius around D.C., and then it has a protected zone 17 miles around the Washington Monument and an inner protected zone 3 miles around the Capitol. That space is essentially unbreachable. It has to be because of the importance of the buildings there.
It's like an aviation no man's land. Nobody goes in there. Nobody.
They have F-16 and F-18 jets at Andrews Air Force Base, about 10 miles south of D.C. They also have the 113th National Guard Air Wing at Anacostia Naval Air Station that can send scrambler jets up in a very short period of time. Both are in place that day. Neither one responds at all until after the Pentagon is hit. In addition to that, the Pentagon has its own defenses.
If a plane, any kind of a plane, was coming in towards the Pentagon, why didn't the anti-aircraft missiles batteries that are there, why didn't they fire to protect the building? This is, after all, the most heavily protected building on the planet. That craft had to have been a military craft, because only the military craft put out a signal. It's called an Identify Friend or Foe IFF device. And only the military craft would be allowed to approach the building.
The two radar systems that the military radars, defensive radar systems, read are a civilian transponder and a military transponder. Military transponder is called IFF. Civilian aircraft do not have an IFF transponder. They are not given that capability, okay? So if there was a 757, American 757, that went into the Pentagon, for example, and it shut off its transponder, it didn't have a military IFF transponder on it. So it was a primary target. It's a primary target going into that airspace. Should have been shot down.
What I'm describing to you is a breakdown in standard operating procedure by FAA, NORAD, P-56, and the Pentagon, all on the same day, in the middle of, after 9/05, what was known nationally to be a terrorist attack. And it makes no sense.
Nobody goes in there.
This is, after all, the most heavily protected building on the planet.
It just doesn't make any sense at all.
The Pentagon symbolizes our military power in the world. And they had hit it. And to this day, nobody knows what they hit it with, whether it was an airplane or whether it was a missile. And our government will never tell us, so we just kept wait for the French to explain it.
What hit it? What's going on?
There is nobody anywhere at any point in this entire investigation that has said that is positively American 77. They suppose it, they presume it, they assume it, they say this is what we think it is.
The controller, Daniel O'Brien, who saw the unidentified blip coming in from the west at a high rate of speed, had no way of knowing what it was, because the primary was a primary return only. The secondary radar, the transponder, was turned off.
In order to identify a primary radar target, you have to have two-way communications between the pilot and the air traffic controller, and the pilot has to report over a certain geographical location, or you have to be able to tell the pilot in the airplane to make a series of turns. And then the radar controller can look at all of the primary targets on his or her radar scope and say, there's an aircraft, or there's a target that just executed the turns I told. Now I can positively identify the aircraft. That never occurred. It's huge.
Now, if Flight 77 really did go off of the radar screen for 36 minutes, according to her testimony, then the airplane was no longer flying, or it was low enough that it was out of radar coverage. One of the two. So, was the airplane landed at some place, some remote field? Then it does make sense that they lost the airplane for 36 minutes. But other than that, there's very little explanation for that.
The one question that they could not get the Air Force to answer correctly in NORAD was why the fighter planes did not go up automatically when the first planes were found to be hijacked.
Anytime an airliner goes off course or loses radio communication or loses its transponder signal, anytime any one of those three things happen, the aircraft is supposed to be intercepted. On 9/11, all three of those things happened. And still, there was no intercept. Those planes flew around for from 20 minutes to an hour and a half without ever being intercepted.
We have direct contacts with our air defense colleagues by means of direct connections that are controlled by this touchscreen apparatus. By pressing just one key here, the call is sent, to which the operator of the defense, in this case, answers directly. In the time it takes to answer the telephone call, around 2 to 3 seconds, the information can be already exchanged. So why weren't the 4 hijacked planes intercepted and shot down? Military jets travel much faster than passenger aircraft. It would have been easy for them to catch up the jet planes before they crashed. This airplane can reach a maximum speed of Mach 2.05. This means it exceeds twice the sound barrier. This is approximately 2,400 kilometers per hour. In the northeast of the United States, there are as many as 16 Air Force bases. Why weren't the Boeing jets intercepted? The official story argues that air defense was informed too late.
One of the biggest lies is that the FAA guys were incompetent. When we lose an airplane, we take action. We do not sit, we do not delay, we go to protocol. Boom, 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 boom. When the air traffic controllers first saw American 11 start to lose its radio, lose its transponder, go off course, and all of these bad things that are going on, they did not take a coffee break.
67 times in that year, 2001, up till September, there had been air emergencies. They can get a plane up in from 6 to 10 minutes and scramble it, and 67 times that year in air emergencies. But there was not an instance where an air emergency went ignored for long periods of time until 9/11.
A lot of people down the road say, well, the president had to give authority to shoot aircraft down and stuff like that. That is not true. An interceptor pilot has the responsibility and the authority on his or her own to shoot down an airplane if they think the situation calls for it, and this is how it would be.
You don't have to wait for a military command. You don't have to wait for orders of any kind. That's not an option. That's the law. It's inherent in being a fighter pilot. You know that's what you have to do, unless somebody has told you to stand down.
Before 1970, we had one form of scrambling aircraft, and it was immediate, bang, bang, bang. Then in the 1970s, we had some hijackings come into our civil airspace, and that wasn't a quick response. What we did in that is we didn't want the hijackers to know that we were there, so we didn't rush the fighters off the ground, and we kind of snuck them up behind the aircraft. So we put a second protocol in, and the reason that the hijacking protocol is slow is because you had to get Pentagon approval before you could release your fighters. Those two type of protocols lasted until June 1st, 2001, 3 months before 9/11. In June of 2001, Rumsfeld and the Pentagon and the military changed the procedures, and instead of having two protocols, one fast, one slow, they went to one protocol, slow. If we had reacted to the in-flight emergency immediately, the fighters would have been up and on the way, and those aircraft would never, ever have reached their targets. But when the center controllers came to notifying the military, okay, because they had only one protocol to work with, that protocol went through the Pentagon. Guess what? Guess who didn't answer the phone? Sorry, it was the Pentagon. Here's an analogy that I can give that would help out the common person here. What Rumsfeld did is the fire call comes into the fire station. But before the fire truck gets a chance to leave, it has to call the mayor of the city to get approval for that departure. And what if the mayor's out for breakfast or he's sleeping late and he doesn't answer the phone?
Look carefully at this footage, shot just a few minutes after the attack on the Pentagon. Notice the man that is helping to carry a casualty. It is the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. What is he doing here when, as head of the defense of the whole nation, and whilst the United States is still under attack, he is helping tend to the wounded? Why is he not at his command post?
The phone calls went to the Pentagon. It went through the military, and the military was sitting there saying, oh, hey, don't answer, don't answer that phone, whatever it might be. Now, how would you like your fire department to sit there and say, well, I'm sorry, we can't come and put your house out and save your lives because the mayor didn't say so? And on 9/12, they changed the protocols again back to the first protocol, which was the fast scrambles, and that's what it is today. So the way that Rumsfeld's Pentagon managed this whole thing is they switched gears, okay? They switched out of having two fast and slow into slow, okay? And then they said, oh, we're bad, 9/12, let's go fast again.
When the United States was attacked without warning at Pearl Harbor, after 8 inquiries, General Walter Short, commander of the Army for the Defense of Hawaii, and Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, were both charged with negligence and summarily dismissed. But after the 9/11 catastrophe, nobody, neither the Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, nor the head of civil aviation, nor that of air defense, was either punished or removed from office.
On September 10th, Brigadier General W. Montague Winfield asked Junior Officer Captain Charles Leidig to temporarily replace him as Director of Operations at the Pentagon Command Center from 8:30 a.m. on September 11th. Later that day, after Flight 93 was reported crashed, Winfield resumed control. Captain Leidig had only just completed a course qualifying him to run the command center. On September the 11th, Brigadier General David F. Worley Jr. was commander of the Andrews Air Force Base, the nearest one to the Pentagon. On September the 11th, Richard B. Myers, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in the absence of Chairman Shelton, was the temporary head of all U.S. Armed Forces.
At a hotel in Arlington, Virginia. It shows the explosion that followed the crash of American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon, but the video does not show the airplane. The video's existence was disclosed in 2002. The hotel manager says it was confiscated by the FBI. It was just publicly released as the result of a lawsuit.
And here is that agenda, the military mission statement of a right-wing think tank, the Project for the New American Century. Written a year before 9/11, it's supported by key members of the current Bush administration.
The drafting was supervised by Jeb Bush, who's the president's younger brother, and by Lewis Libby, who's Cheney's chief of staff. This is about control over Middle East oil. It indicates that America is aiming for global leadership, both military and economically, and what it says, I think, is chilling. It says if we are going to transform America into tomorrow's dominant force, that's their phrase, then it's going to be a long process unless there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like Pearl Harbor.
So, what happened? Well, September 11th happened, obviously, and George W. Bush had to rethink. But for many of those around Bush, there was no rethink. There didn't have to be. Long before September 11th, a small, influential group of neoconservatives here in Washington had wanted to see the United States transformed into a sort of benevolent ruler, unchallenged, astride the world. And long before George W. Bush was elected, they sat down and they wrote down a manifesto. The document was effectively a charter of the Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank in Washington.
The founding members included Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz of the Defense Department, Richard Pearl, head of the Defense Advisory Board, Lewis Libby, Cheney's chief of staff, John Bolton, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, like Cohen, who's on the Defense Policy Board.
Much of what these men wanted is coming true. They urged that the U.S. abandon the anti-ballistic missile treaty. It has. They wanted establishment of more permanent U.S. military bases abroad. That is happening in the Philippines and in Georgia and will likely happen in Iraq. They urged regime change as a goal of foreign wars, not just in Iraq. They wanted the U.S. as a global constabulary, their word, unburdened by the UN or world opinion, preventing any challenge to U.S. dominance. But, they wrote, a year before September 11th, such aspirations are unlikely to be realized without a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
The United States of America is the most powerful nation on earth. In itself, this goes a long way to explaining the things it does around the world. At present, it's conducting a war on terror, or more accurately, a campaign against opposition to US domination. Others prefer to call it the beginnings of the Third World War. The United States has an insatiable appetite for conflict, and since going into Korea in the 1950s, it's been at war with someone or other in some corner of the globe non-stop right up to the present day. This drive is now led by the weapons manufacturers themselves. It is a highly dangerous precedent. I call it war corporatism. It is the door of a new fascism being pushed open. And don't be fooled, not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler. The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency has been captured by the most powerful elements of this corporatism. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. The attack by Al-Qaeda on the World Trade Center is just one response to it. Is this a conspiracy? Quite the opposite. It is a high-profile project known as the Project for the New American Century. people like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Pearl, are the major players among politicians, right-wing thinkers, militarists and industrialists in the creation of the project. The project is a neoconservative manifesto which includes in its toolbox the unbridled use of war in clearing a path for US interests. The will to attack Iraq came entirely from this visible yet sinister group. September the 11th was merely the pretext. Bush is merely the figurehead. And so, who's next, you wonder? Iran? North Korea? France? Britain? None of us really matter to them.